Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. Super excited for this next session. It looks like we've got a few folks in here that are saying the same thing, which is awesome. Got my buddy here, Chris Inman. He is the director of program development with the Healthy Dispatcher, and he's going to be doing a session called Communicating Discipline, the Critical Exchange. Take it away, my friend.
Thank you, Ricardo, so much. Thanks for having me here. And thanks everybody that has joined us for this class. It's great to have you here. And even though I can't see you, I can sense you. So it's really awesome to be here with you in this great conference. And again, a quick pat on the back to Ricardo for everything that he's done to bring this to people. And I know for a lot of us who can't get up out of the comm center, who don't have necessarily the number of people that we need to take a great trip across the country to go to training, to have training like this that you can see and take part in from wherever you are is just endlessly valuable. So big thanks to Ricardo for all the work he's put into this. And we know he's put a tremendous amount of work into it. I can tell by the new lines that I've seen under his eyes. So that's proof positive that work has been done. All right, let's get to it. This is Communicating Discipline, the Critical Exchange. I am Chris Inman. And as mentioned by Ricardo, I am the Director of Program Development for the Healthy Dispatcher. I joined the company in July of 23 after a 28-year career in 911. I worked my entire career in Springfield, Missouri for Springfield Greene County 911. And during the course of my employment there, I did pretty much everything you can do in a comm center. I was a call taker, I was a dispatcher, I became a CTO, a supervisor, training manager, and finally the last 3 years, I became the director of the department. So proof positive that if you stick around long enough and try not to kill too many people, they still have to find a place to put you. They just kept running out of places for me. So I've had my hands in just a little bit of everything. I've sat in the seat that you sit in. I've done the job that you do, and I know what it feels like. I know what that whole process is. And I know that part of the process of doing the job that we do in 911 is training. All sorts of training for all sorts of things. And just when you think training is over, training starts again. And just when you've been trained to do a position, we get new tech and we have to train on that tech. And then maybe you get promoted and you have to train on that promotion. But sometimes during that promotional process, maybe the training isn't quite what we want or need it to be. Maybe we don't quite get all the little nuances of training that we need to get in order to excel. And I think that difficult conversations that we have from a supervisory perspective, and to be frank, from a subordinate perspective, is one of those areas that not many of us ever get much training in. I'm going to talk more about this as we go forward, and I'm going to talk about how few of us, and I'll be curious to see what you all have to say in the comments, who have been promoted, did not receive training in how to have difficult conversations. And in particular, the conversation I'll be talking about here today, which is the communication of discipline. So I'm going to talk more about that. I'm going to talk about the difficulties that come from sitting next to people who you are in charge of a couple weeks after you've been sitting next to them, or a couple months, or a couple years, or whatever it may be. But I'm also going to talk in this class about what it's like to have these difficult communication elements from the subordinate side of things. So not just if you are a supervisor, but if you also work for somebody. It's a difficult conversation that very few of us know truly how to enter into properly. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to get into detail on that. But before I do, as I introduce myself, when I started with Adam Tim at the Healthy Dispatcher in July of 23, a lot of things I had to adjust to in order to get on this side of things out of the comm center. And one of those things as I was preparing all my materials was a professional headshot. So Adam said to me, hey, Chris, you need to get some professional headshots to use in our advertising and our promos. And I've done that, certainly. But there's one professional headshot that I will use every time I do a class for anybody, anywhere. Because if you've got this picture in your, I don't even know, if you've got this picture available, this is a picture you use. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is my professional headshot. Now, apologies, because this will adhere to your cerebral cortex and never leave it. So there you go. But if you got this pic, you got to use it, do you not? In fact, I'm not completely opposed to the idea of just spending the next hour quietly staring at this horrific picture. And by the way, if you didn't notice, the hair in and of itself is bad, but we take a look at that Adam's apple. It's roughly the size of a Honda Civic, just so you know. All right, moving on. That's enough of that. Let's talk about what we're here to do today. Before we do, I want to make this point clear. There is absolutely no magic button when it comes to having a successful difficult conversation. There's not a magic button. There's not a single piece of information that I can share with you that is going to instantly make you great at difficult conversations, that is instantly going to make you comfortable in having those somewhat confrontational conversations, because difficult conversations can absolutely veer into the confrontational. And yes, Samantha, I did take that picture yesterday. Thank you for that question. So there is no magic button that's going to prepare you for that. And I don't make the claim that what I'm going to share with you in this class is going to suddenly make you perfect and comfortable. It isn't. There is no end all be all. But what this class is designed to do, and really what any class should be there for you to do, is to increase your odds of success. Your odds that when you have a difficult conversation with a coworker, somebody you work for, somebody who works for you, that conversation can end in a positive and constructive way. Because they don't always, which we're going to talk about. So I want to make it abundantly clear as I start this class that I make no grandiose promises of perfection. And when you're finished with this class, you're not suddenly going to drop to your knees, look skyward, and say, Chris has shared with us the ultimate information that will make me perfect. No class is going to do that. And I oftentimes, back in the day, took a lot of classes that promise such things. I don't. But what I do promise you is that with the information I will share with you today, the odds of your success will greatly increase. And isn't that what it's all about? Isn't life just a game of odds? Well, that's what this will be. So how did this class start? So in 2012, in my early 40s, I went back and got my graduate degree, my master's degree. And in so doing, I was told by the folks who were running my program that, you know what, when you do your final project, do it about your work. Find something about your work that perplexes you, something you can't figure out, something that you really would like to put some serious study into. And more than that, maybe if we're lucky, it's something you'll be able to share with other people who do what you do to help them in some way. So I thought this was amazing. What a great opportunity this would be to really get deep into a topic. So what in 911 perplexes me? Sadly, the quick answer to that was so much that I couldn't pick from all of it. But as I started thinking about it over the course of weeks, I started making some observations. And one of those observations was this. There's a room, by the way, that most of us or some of us have in our comm centers near our dispatch floors that I will refer to as that room. And oftentimes when someone is taken into that room, it's because somebody's in trouble. It's the kind of thing that makes dispatchers prairie dog up from their consoles and take note. It's the kind of thing that starts a little bit of talk throughout the room. They're going in that room. I wonder why they're taking them in that room. Look, they're not even working. You get the idea. So when people get taken into that room, it's usually not a good thing. So what I started noticing was what happened when supervisors would take people into that room for disciplinary conversations. And I noted that a really awesome supervisor that we had at the time, very friendly guy, extremely well liked, every time he took someone into that room, it ended bad. You heard yelling in the room. Oftentimes people would come out crying from that room or whatever it is for you. And it just never went well, which perplexed me because this is a great supervisor, well liked, but that conversation was clearly difficult for him to have constructively. Conversely, I watched a supervisor on evening shift who was kind of brusque, quite to the point, was considered rude by some. And she would take people into that room and they would always come out positively. Now, nobody comes out of that room linked arm in arm singing Kumbaya, but they would always come out with a sense of accomplishment, that no matter what was discussed, how difficult it may have been, good came from it. And this completely perplexed me. Now, this was a communication master's degree, and this is a communication issue, so it seemed like a perfect fit. Why is it that some people are good at that and some people aren't? Is there something there that we can all learn to help us be better, not just from that supervisor's perspective, but from the subordinate's perspective as well? And that's how this class came to be. And I didn't think it would amount to much more than a graduate project, and yet it has become one of my signature classes that I teach for the Healthy Dispatcher, and it continues year after year to be one of the most popular classes I teach because we all have to deal with difficult conversations, and very few of us, as I mentioned, have had the training for that, and even fewer of us go into these conversations with any kind of plan. What we do instead is spend the days leading up to it worrying constantly about what's going to happen. What are we going to say? We're nervous. It's all we can think about. We can't sleep thinking about it. We get angry. We get upset, and all of that stuff. So that's how the class began, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. Now, as we get going, I do want to get into some terms here. I'm going to use the words supervisor and subordinate throughout the class. When I say supervisor today, I'm talking about supervisors, trainers, leads, anyone who is responsible for the performance of another, and that would even include CTOs. So if you are responsible for the performance of another person, I'm going to call you a supervisor today, just to give you an idea of how the terminology is going to work. I'm also going to use the word subordinate. And when I say subordinate today in this class, I'm talking about line level employees. I'm talking about dispatchers, trainees, or frankly, anyone who works under the direction of another person. So all of us are subordinates. So this class is going to speak to you if you are in charge of folks or a person. This class is also going to have information for you if you work for someone. And even when I was a director, I worked for someone. Lord knows, I worked for many people as a director. So we always work for someone. And as a result of that, we always have something to learn about this process. All right. I also want to define what a disciplinary discussion is with regard to my reference to it in this class. So I'm talking about any face-to-face meeting between a supervisor and subordinate, and remember these words are loosely used, which discusses performance issues, errors, urgent areas of improvement. Now, I'm not talking about coaching or training when I talk about disciplinary discussions in this class. I'm talking about potentially punitive conversations that disciplinary action is likely a result from. I'm talking about, quote unquote, when you get in trouble. I'm talking about, quote unquote, being called to the carpet for something. So you get what I'm talking about there. This is not on the floor coaching. This is not gentle correction. This is not, oh, you did that well, but here's how you could do it better. This is legitimate disciplinary discussion, one of the toughest of all difficult conversations at work. So I couldn't shake these questions about disciplinary conversations as I started looking at them. Why are some supervisors and CTOs and others in the supervisor lane not good at this and others are? Some people go into that room and they're just good at it. Some people go into that room with the best intentions, many, many days of thinking about it, and it goes poorly. Why? How do supervisors and subordinates differ in the way they see this communication? They see it differently. How? And ultimately, can these different perceptions of what this conversation is, what it should be, what it's going to be, can it be reconciled? In other words, can we all, supervisors, subordinates, and everything in between, come to agreement about how it should go, what we should do, what kind of plan we should have when we go into that conversation? So why do we care about this particular type of difficult conversations? There are a lot of difficult conversations that we have at work. In fact, as 911 folks, all we do are difficult conversations, if you really want to break it down. But when we're talking about communicating discipline, a lot of things happen here. A lot of things are potentially formed here, such as lasting perceptions, job satisfaction, attitude, future performance. If you've got a person in your center who is not easy to get along with, if you've got people in your center who sit over at the side of the room and criticize everybody else, but they don't get involved themselves, a lot of times these folks come to us like that. But sometimes they're made. Sometimes they aren't that way initially. They become that way. And studies have indicated with pretty good clarity that that person can be modeled or at least turned down a dark path during a conversation about discipline that goes off the rails. That's when a person like that can start talking about they and us. That's when a person like that can start referring to management as them. Those idiots, they have no idea what they're doing. So how we construct and finish these disciplinary conversations with our subordinates can oftentimes model who these subordinates ultimately become, what they think of the place that they work, what they think of the people in charge. It's not always the case, but it often is. And job satisfaction, just the way you see the job, can be impacted, if not outright formed, during this conversation. And work identity is formed. So let me talk to you a little bit about work identity and what it is. Every single one of you has a very closely held and deeply defended idea of who you think you are at work. If I were to ask you individually to tell me who you think you are at work, what is your work identity? You would probably tell me a more politically correct version of how you truly feel inside. You may not even be able to tell me specifically what your work identity is. But here's what I can tell you. If your work identity is threatened, you're going to dig in and you're going to defend hard, because our work identities in 911 are deeply held, and it takes a long time to get there. And we've talked about many, many times, not everyone can do the job that we do. There are times in our training, certainly in mine, although I did have the Adam's apple in the hair, so I had something going for me. But there were times in my training, as I'm sure there were in yours, when I thought there's no way I'm going to be able to do this job. You know, I told him in the interview I could multitask. Not like this. I can't do this. So ultimately, when you find that you can do this, when you get good at this, you start to develop a pride in what you do, and you should. And with that pride comes a work identity about who you think you are. And when someone threatens that by calling you to the carpet for something that you've done, which, by the way, as a dispatcher, you've already beaten yourself up for yourself. I mean, think about that. When you make a mistake of any sort, who kicks your ass harder than you do? Nobody does. And yet you know that you're still going to have this conversation, go through the inquiry process. You know how it works. But that work identity is a key part of what I'm going to tell you about today. It's a key part of it. So the construction of this discourse is absolutely critical when it comes to all this. So what I determined I would do as part of my research into this was talk to actual dispatchers, supervisors, subordinates about their thoughts. And I'm going to talk to you about how I put that all together and what came from that in just a little while. It was eye-opening, not stunning insofar as it's information you don't already know, but to have it made as clear as it became to me was quite eye-opening. So that's what I'm going to share with you in just a bit. A little bit more here about what people need from each other in 911. And I want you to think about the job that we do and how interdependent we are on each other. It's so amazing when you first start at 911, this understanding that you develop that, oh my gosh, everything I do has to do with the person next to me. They have to show up to work for me to have time off. They have to put good comments in the call for me to be able to dispatch it. They have to answer the call so that I can answer my call. We're so interdependent on each other at 911, much more so than normal gigs. If you think about people that work in an insurance office and their different cubicles, somebody calls out sick, who cares? Somebody does poor work on whatever they're doing, it has nothing to do with me. I wish you all the best, but it doesn't have anything to do with me. But in 911, every little thing that every person does has something to do with what you do. It just does. So having difficult conversations in a heated environment in which we have our emotions subdued because we have to in order to deal with what we deal with, when we're so dependent on other people, and when we're dependent on other people to this degree, we tend to be a little less patient with them sometimes because I need what I need and I need it now and you're not getting it for me. I do this quicker than you. Why is it taking you so long? These comments you put in are crap. I can't read them. This makes no sense. So we can get a little bit, you know how it can be. I'm not suggesting we're all like that all the time, but I think most of us are like that some of the time. That's the nature of what we do. So difficult conversations in our environment are even more critical. They're even more difficult than they might be in other environments. So a little bit more about work identity. It is constructed by you subtly, slowly over time. You may not, as I mentioned, be even able to say it to me exactly what your work identity is, but you know it. You know what it is. And threats to it certainly turn you into a mama bear guarding her cubs. Now, you guys, I don't know if a papa bear would guard cubs. I think papa bears don't do a lot, but for the sake of this example, you also become a mama bear. So I want you to think about how you define yourself at work. Way down deep, you great dispatcher, awesome call taker. Are you great at certain aspects? I'm certain that you are. And because we live in a world that pilots and surgeons live in, and that world is we can't afford to make mistakes. Now, we make them because we're human, but when dispatchers make mistakes, it is earth-shattering for us. But because of that, we create this element of perfection all the time. Now, think about the job that we do. We have to be perfect. We aren't always because we're human, but the job suggests to us that we be perfect. We can't make mistakes. Little mistakes can make a huge difference. You guys know this. All of us have, if we've done this for any length of time, a mistake that we can't shake. I made a mistake 30 years ago. I put the wrong directional in on a working church fire. And because I did, the response was delayed to such an extent that the church burned down. There was nobody in it, thank God, literally. But that was my mistake that I'll never, ever shake. And I still had to go through the inquiry process. And it was a huge threat to who I thought I was. And I had to kind of redefine and open myself up to learning, which when it comes to mistakes is really, really hard for us. You guys know this because we hold ourselves to an even higher level of perfection than the profession asks of us. That's what we do. It's who we are. It's why dispatchers kick ass, because we demand such greatness from ourselves. It takes its toll. God knows that's a whole nother class. But that's what we do. That's who we are. My officers are going home safe because I'm not letting anything happen to them. I don't care if I can barely walk. I'm going to work because I'm not missing a day. This is the dispatcher ethos. This is who we are. And by the way, the church I burned down, I just want to add, they built a much bigger, nicer church. It's way, way better. So I feel really, really good about that. Really, really good. I don't really, but that's what I'm going to go with. All right. So I'm going to ask you today, as we continue to go forward here, to start getting introspective. I'm going to ask you to start thinking about things that are natural to you, that are reflexive to you. And when we do that, it can get a little weird, but that's what we need to do in order to truly learn about ourselves, especially if you have done this for a while and you are well defined about who you are. So I want you to re-look at who you are and how you think and how your actions impact others and how their actions impact you. And I warn you, getting introspective is like being aware of blinking. So I want you to think about blinking right now. Are you blinking? Are your eyes open? Are you double blinking because I mentioned it? Did you just blink now because that's when you would have blinked had I not mentioned? You get the idea. When we think about things that are natural and reflexive, it can get a little weird. So I'm going to ask you to continue to do that, though, as we delve into the information that I'm going to share with you. Now, one of the things about tough conversations is there's almost always, because of work identity, because of this sense of needing to be perfect that we all hold ourselves to, that the job demands from us, our reactions can be emotional. We tend to feel threatened. We sometimes feel attacked, hurt, questioned, somehow made to feel lesser than when someone, even in a position of authority, calls us out for something that we do. And that's not to suggest that most of us aren't coachable. I'm painting with a fairly broad brush here, but I think I am speaking to emotions that all of us as dispatchers feel when it comes to having a conversation about a mistake that we've made. So when it comes to emotions, things can get a little wacky. When we get super emotional, we aren't who we want to be. We don't think the way we need to think. And because of that, things can quickly go off the rails. And I want you to think about what happens to you when you're emotional and how you react and how you're not remotely the person you normally would be. I mean, have you ever had that scenario where you just pop off at somebody that you care about and 10 minutes later you're like, God, what even was that? Where did that even come from? Well, we could get deep into emotions in 911 and how difficult they are for us. Because when you start at 911, if you're anything like me, you fell into the job from something completely unrelated. And so you had to learn how to compartmentalize your normal human emotions. You had to learn how to take a reaction that you would have pre-911 to talking to a woman whose child is deceased in front of her. You had to learn how to take the reaction that any human would have to that and pocket it in the space of efficiency. So we have to be efficient, not emotional. Doesn't mean we can't be empathetic to our callers. The best call takers are, but it does mean that we don't have the time to experience the emotions that we would have normally experienced had we heard this call before we worked in 911. So we're pocketing emotions all the time. And for many of us who do this over the course of time, we don't ever properly deal with those emotions once pocketed. We just leave them. And slowly we become less emotional about everything. We stop feeling the way we felt before. We stop reacting to things the way we reacted before. We become almost even keel about anything. But here's a fact about emotions. They're still there. They're still going to have their day. and they are still going to demand to be heard from. And emotions held at bay tend to curdle, they tend to sour. And when they come back up, which they will, they can get ugly. And they oftentimes emerge during difficult conversations. So I want to talk about an emotion-based threat reaction cycle, and there are three elements to this. One of them is fairly common. The second is a bit more evolved. And the third is what I want us all to shoot for, to work toward. And it's not easy to do. So for most of us, there is a triggered state that we find ourselves in. It's a strong emotional threat response anytime we feel somehow threatened or attacked. The person is disturbed, distressed, and likely to lose control of their emotions. I talked about when I started researching this topic, the supervisor who everybody really liked, when he would take someone into that room, we'd hear shouting and people really upset in there. There was clearly a triggered threat reaction cycle. The second and more evolved cycle is a reactive threat reaction cycle. It's emotion-based, where the person may be distressed or disturbed by the perceived threat, but they'll still be able to discuss, listen, maybe even reflect, while perhaps starting to modulate their emotional response. If only there was something we could do to get there. Well, there is. But ultimately, in a perfect world, we want to get ourselves during these difficult conversations to a creative emotion-based reaction cycle, where the person can control their emotional response and is open to thinking more flexibly, taking perspectives, emerging in collaborative problem solving. Now, I know that sounds like the land of Oz, and it's a perfect world. I'm not naive enough to think that we turn a key and suddenly all of our difficult conversations in dispatch end this way. But this is a worthy goal that we should work toward, and we can work toward it. Now, as we talk about emotions, there is actual science to the way that emotions make us feel. Any kind of strong emotion tends to trip off the amygdala, which is your emotional center, and literally impairs your prefrontal cortex's working memory. So there's some stuff going on up there when you're super emotional. The power of these emotions does indeed overwhelm your rationality. If you feel like you are terribly irrational when you're emotional, you are, so am I. I'm a Denver Broncos fan, so I'm very irrational on Sundays, especially the last few years, although they are getting better. So this is the literal scientific reason why when we're upset or stressed, we can't think straight. And believe it or not, and this is a scientific fact, IQ points are temporarily depleted when we're super upset. So with all that being understood now, it makes a little bit more sense, doesn't it? When we go into difficult conversations, particularly about discipline, we've got this work identity thing we're going on. Yeah, thank you, Roxy. I agree. I didn't think they were going to be better either, but I'm sure glad they are. So we've got all these emotions going on. We've got these subdued emotions. We've got this need to be perfect. We've got this closely defended work identity that we all share. We've all busted our humps to get from clueless trainees who didn't think they could ever do this job to actually doing it and doing it well. And now someone's going to pull us aside to let us have it about something we've already kicked our own asses over since we made the mistake. So when you think about all that, when you think about just the unique ingredients that go with difficult conversations, particularly conversations about discipline in dispatch, it's honestly surprising that they don't all explode. So let's start talking a little bit more about how emotions affect you. And I want you to ask yourself these questions and be honest. How do emotions affect your behavior? How do emotions affect the behavior of others when you have them? So if you come in super emotional, how does that affect other people? Remember, this is a crazily interdependent scenario in which you work. So when you come in a bad mood, it's going to affect other people. Have you ever worked with someone who is just emotionally mercurial? In other words, they're up, they're down, they're all around. You don't ever know what kind of mood they're going to be in, and everybody kind of hunkers down as they come in just to see what they're going to be dealing with. Our emotions affect each other all the time. They affect our behavior. They affect how we respond. They affect our ability to be objective. So we have to first and foremost understand all of this when it comes to learning about how to be better in this discussion that we're going to be talking about here. Now, I want to talk about dialogue and debate, and the difference in the two, and why it's important to take note of the difference, why it's important to work to get out of a debate stance and get into a dialogue stance when it comes to any kind of difficult conversation, heck, at work or at home. Now, we're human beings, so we tend to dig in and defend. If somebody says something to us or makes a point that isn't our point, or they have an idea or an opinion that isn't our idea or opinion, in fact, it conflicts with our idea or opinion, we are inclined to dig in and defend our opinion. We are inclined to make the point that, no, no, here's the right thing. No, no, here's the true thing. I hate to use politics as an example, but it is a great example. Even though ultimately, and it's true about work as well, we're all trying to get to the same place. We all want the same good things. We're just going about it differently. And sometimes we get so hung up in the different paths that we're taking that we forget across the board that we all want the same stuff. So we do tend to dig in and defend. And sometimes, you know what? There aren't sides. Sometimes both sides can be right. Sometimes feelings and opinions on both sides are legitimate, even though you may not share them. Maybe someone has an idea or an opinion that clashes with yours, but that doesn't mean theirs is wrong. But when it comes to debating, it's always wrong. We need to understand that more than one truth can exist. One of the things I used to do in my center was mediate really ugly, and once it reached a terrible stage of conflict. So if I had two people in conflict who were locked up and weren't even working well together, I'd bring them into my office for mediation. And one of the things that I learned in doing that was oftentimes when we get into locked up conflict, we do so because this person says that person is a jerk, and this person says that person is a jerk. And their argument is about, no, I'm not a jerk. Yes, you are. I'm not a jerk. Yes, you are. And that's where they get locked up. Well, as a mediator, I was able to show them and not convince them necessarily that, you know what, you think you're a jerk and you think you're a jerk. You're both jerks. Whether you agree with it or not, let's drop that. Because arguing about unmovable opinions gets us nowhere. So let's drop that. You don't have to agree with each other. And let's talk about the things in the middle. Let's talk about how we can work together. I don't care if you two love each other, but stop arguing that you are or aren't a jerk. I mean, I ask you, do you ever go on Facebook and I'm asking you legit, do you ever go on Facebook and argue politics? I hope you said no to that. Now, if you're anything like me, I like to grab some little popcorn and watch people argue politics on Facebook, but it's not something I'm ever going to do because it's a stupid waste of time. Has anyone's opinion ever been changed about their political views in an argument on Facebook? Of course it hasn't, because you're arguing people's truths. And when you argue people's truths and dig in and defend and go into debate mode, no one wins that. No one can win that. You know what it does? You know what it does. It makes people dig in and defend harder. It makes people madder. It makes people generalize, quote unquote, the other side even more. And the same thing is true when it comes to any kind of difficult conversations, particularly conversations about discipline that we have in 911. So what do we need to do, guys? We need to move beyond the need to prove our sides to the detriment of another. In debate, it's about winning. It's about one right answer. It's combative. It's about finding flaws in other points. It's close-minded. And in a debate, when it's over, it's over. I win, you lose. I'm right, you're wrong. I'm good, you're evil. End of story. And it's not workable. It's not. And yet it is the human condition to dig in and defend. We need to work toward dialogue, ladies and gents. It's open to learning. It's about finding a solution together, even when emotions are hot. It's collaborative. How can I be better? How can you help me be better? It finds strengths in other points, even when it's painful to do so. It's open-minded. It seeks new options, new opinions. And you know what? When we engage in dialogue with each other, even when it gets heated, and it can, it perceives no threat. And when we can have difficult conversations with each other in which neither side feels a true threat, we can make progress. We can get to that threat reaction cycle where we subdue our emotions, where we hear each other, where we're okay, even though it's painful, where we can be told in burning that church down, as I did, that there were mistakes made and that we have work to do and that we understand that and we're good with that. And again, I'm probably speaking to many people watching this right now who are already that way. So Chris, I'm super coachable. I don't dig in and defend like you're describing. I kind of get the work identity thing, and sometimes I get a little mad inside, but I'm open to it. Good, you need to be. But there are things that you can do to continue that and be even better. So let's talk about communicating. Communicating 101, in fact. Perception is reality, guys. What they think you are, you are. So let me describe that and explain it a little bit further. If you work with 12 people and two of those people think you are the devil incarnate, then that's their opinion. But if you work with 12 people and 10 of those people think you're the devil incarnate, you are probably the devil incarnate. The bottom line is this: oftentimes change is difficult for us to undertake because despite the vast opinions that we refuse to listen to, they're wrong, I'm right. Again, if there are outliers, these folks who, if you hand $1,000 to, the next thing they're going to do is say, well, this is a bunch of crap. It should have been 1,100. I'm not talking about those people. Those people are going to see evil in anyone because that's the path they've chosen. I'm not talking about them. But what I am suggesting to you is if you are a trainer and every single trainee you have says you're a jerk, you're a jerk. If you're a supervisor and your entire shift kind of huddles down when you come in and they don't have much to say because they think you're a total jerk, you're a total jerk. Bottom line is we need to be open when it comes to being more introspective. Remember, I talked about how awkward this can be. We need to be open to the reality that is mass perception. And when we have work identity, it doesn't allow often for us to open ourselves up to the idea that our work identity may not be entirely correct. Maybe all these folks and the way they feel is the correct version. So what I'm suggesting to you is, while your work identity is part and parcel of who you are, it's not always telling you the truth. And sometimes mass opinion is trying to do that to tell you the truth. Continuing our talk about communication, remember nonverbal communication, especially if you're in a position of authority. It starts communicating as soon as you walk into the room. Your nonverbal communication has more to say often than anything you actually say. I teach public speaking on the college level here at home, and I spend a huge amount of time in my public speaking classes talking about nonverbal communication and how important it is and how we can oftentimes misjudge each other because of the way we read those nonverbals. And make no mistake, guys, you are reading, right or wrong, nonverbal communication from people all the time. They may not mean it, but you read it. And that's just part of it. And if you have anything to say about anyone else, and even if you're a subordinate who works for somebody else, and you're entering into one of these difficult conversations, the nonverbals you bring into that conversation before they even start can often dictate the way they go. So be aware. And I'm not suggesting you walk around like a Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade float. What I am suggesting is that you be aware that nonverbals are as integral a part of communication as speaking. And a big part of communicating is listening. Now, I understand when I talk about listening, I'm talking to dispatchers. You guys are aggressive, selective listeners by trade. And that means you are not listeners like you once were before you worked in 911. You're just not anymore. You can't be. You have to listen for what you need and what you need only. We only hear Charlie Brown's parents in our heads if it's not information that we need in the moment. Blue shirt, brown pants, white male, wah, 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 blue car. If somebody's telling us things we can't use right now, it just becomes gibberish to us. If somebody is starting to meander their point, it drives dispatchers crazy because we listen for what we need only. And you know damn well you do this at home too. You know you do. And I want you to think about when you first started in 911, about how your loved ones and your friends are like, what happened to you? Why are you such a jerk now? Think about the differences in how you listen. Like before 911, your mom would call and she'd go on and on and on and on and on, and you'd talk to her for 45 minutes like that. But after 911, when your mom would call, you'd take control of the conversation. What are you doing, Mom? What are you doing there? You don't know? Call me when you know, and you'd hang the damn phone up. We'd listen differently. So communicating for us during difficult conversations, during the conversation about discipline, is really, really harder, again, than other professions, because other professions don't listen like we do. And again, aggressive selective listening becomes the way we listen. I've been out of the comm center now for a year and a half. I still am an aggressive selective listener. I still glaze over when I feel like somebody's not getting to the point. So that makes it extra hard. But understand that listening is a vital part of communicating. All right, let's get to my research. I want to talk a little bit about it and what I did and what I came up with as I started to dig into how do supervisors and subordinates differ in the way they enter this conversation. Why is it good for some? Why is it bad for others? So what I did was what's called a qualitative thematic analysis, and it's much simpler than it sounds. I interviewed 30 subordinates and 30 supervisors, and I asked them open-ended questions. I recorded and transcribed all the interviews, and what I did was coding for emerging themes. So ultimately what that means is I was looking in that group of subordinates to see if the same things were said frequently by everybody I interviewed. Now, the folks running my research, the professors at school, said, okay, here's how this is going to work. If you get like 7 to 9 common themes in each group, that's pretty good, because the smaller the number of common themes, the more valid that information is, the more usable it will be. So, Chris, when you do your research, you're looking for, gosh, if it's really, really tight, 5 to 10 common themes for each group. 3 common themes emerged, which set the professors on fire. This is amazing. This means something. Now, I will say before we get into this information that this was not a 2,000 person, 20-year study. So this is not a definitive bit of information that I'm going to share with you, but it is legit. And it was immediately clear in these interviews, throughout the interviews, the same common themes. So I'm going to share what came out of the interviews. What were these emergent themes? There were 2 that came from the subordinates group, and there was only 1 emergent theme from the supervisor group. Now, there were other things that were said, but these were the themes that were continually emergent. None of this information is earth-shattering insofar as you've never thought of it before, or it's never dawned on you before. But what this information does do is provide you now with something that you can take into these conversations that maybe you didn't take into them before. And I'm telling you right now, the lack of them guarantees failure in these conversations. But when you use them, they work. Here's what subordinates told me. The way I perceive the message is going to determine how this conversation goes. In other words, is the supervisor, the trainer, whoever it is, condescending to me? Are they interrupting me? Are they being rude to me? My perception of the way they're talking to me is the most important thing. The second thing they told me, supervisors must listen. Again, I know what I'm talking about here when it comes to aggressive. I'm asking a lot that we listen, but you know damn well what it is to be listened to. And you know how insulting it is if you're pouring yourself out to somebody and they're doing that thing where you can clearly tell they're not listening to you. So these were the 2 emergent themes among the subordinate interview group, over and over and over. How I perceive the message, and the person delivering the message has to listen. One thing that virtually every supervisor said, there were other things, but this was the emerging theme: subordinates must accept responsibility. This doesn't work if they don't, period. Let's get into some of what the subordinates had to say. Jim said, my trainer came off like such a know-it-all. I mean, she did know a lot, but she acted like it was some sort of gift from God, and the fact I couldn't quite get it every day meant I was somehow deficient. It's just how she came off. She'd sigh or make expressions thinking I couldn't see or sense them. Well, I could, and it affected my training, and it made me feel damn stupid. I mean, she was a department trainer of the year, too, so I just felt like I must be stupid, and I quit. Again, how was that message perceived by the subordinate? Lisa said her trainer wouldn't listen to her. I mean, everyone's training is hard, so I don't want to come off like I'm whining, but my supervisor was totally one way when it came to hearing me. You can tell she's trained for several years and has her methods, and I'm not saying they don't work, but I learn in different ways on different days, and I just couldn't get her to listen to me. She just bulldozed right over me, and it made me feel like I'm 6. I'm 36, and I felt like a dumb little kid. Not being listened to is insulting, especially when we're trying to do a difficult thing. Daphne said, if I'm being come at like I feel I'm being attacked, then the whole thing is negative and I'm going to react like I'm just shut down, actually. I'm not going to communicate, and I'm sure as hell not going to listen to that. You might as well forget it if you think you're getting anywhere with me once that's out there. I don't care what your title is. So supervisors, if you're not listening in that conversation, and if they don't perceive you to be listening, you may say, I listened. Did you? And if you come at them in such a way that does not allow them to tell their side, to be listened to, if you don't come at them from a constructive coaching perspective, it's going to fail every time, this conversation. It's going to end ugly. It's going to end negatively. And there is no chance of something constructive coming from it. Supervisors that I interviewed said, Eddie him said, I literally showed her how to do a combined call type in CAD 5 different times, and she sits with another trainer and can't do it. I'm sure the other trainer thought it was because I didn't train that, which is complete crap. We all train that repeatedly. I just get so tired of trainees refusing to just admit they forgot or weren't listening. To be honest, I didn't want a trainer anymore after that. A trainee didn't take responsibility, and it undermined Eddie's work identity as a trainer. Melissa, a supervisor, said, when I discipline an employee, it's entirely 100% dependent on what they say back to me. If they say, okay, I understand this could have been handled a different way, I see your point and I accept responsibility, then that means the job is done. If they start refusing to hear me and respond to what I'm saying the right way, no positive end to that. Again, Melissa is the supervisor. She has a job to do. And if the subordinate doesn't take responsibility, Melissa's job can't be done. Her work identity is threatened. But maybe that subordinate isn't taking responsibility because they don't perceive that Melissa's listening or that Melissa's being condescending. Do you see how these themes can completely undermine even the best efforts by everyone involved? And Rick, a trainer, said, you an adult, then don't blame anyone or anything else. You either know it or you don't. If I start getting excuses when I'm correcting you, then you are wasting my time. An extreme example, but a good one nonetheless. So what do we take from all this, guys? We take this. Supportive, confirming responses are expected by both sides in this conversation, in any difficult conversation, but in particular, in a conversation about discipline. No confirming behaviors, in other words, behaviors that confirm your work identity without threatening it, without putting you in a defense mode, then you will have failure in these conversations, regardless of any other element. You just will. Now, doing these things every single time is not always going to guarantee that everyone comes out of this in a positive way. But not doing these things will absolutely guarantee you that it fails. And as I did some follow-up work with the supervisors that I mentioned to you earlier that inspired this whole thing, this proved true. So the supervisor who was successful was doing the things that emerged in this research. The supervisor that was so nice was not. It was really quite a moment of realization. Identity confirmation remains vital. And this is the best, I think, definition that I found of identity confirmation. A group member's identities are confirmed in a work group to the extent that others in the group support them. Identity confirmation is a state that exists when an individual's social environment is consistent with his or her self-identity. So this doesn't mean that we have to respect work identity to the point that we can't discipline other people, that we can't have tough conversations with them. Of course we can, and of course we have to. But we need to do so with work identity in mind. And maybe before, that's not something you were doing, but maybe going forward it's something you will do. So what do we take from this? If you're a subordinate, a trainee, your identity confirmation means endorsement of your worth by the supervisor or trainer, or whoever it is that's in charge of you. If you're in charge of other people, subordinate or trainees accepting responsibility for their actions immediately reinforces, reemphasizes your work identity and gets you the sense that, you know what, this is my job to do. I did it and it's done. And the person took from me what they needed to. Supervisors, be aware of the potential impact that your interactions can have. I ask that you be introspective and aware of your strengths and weaknesses at all times. Understand that perception is reality. Make a concerted effort from just understanding yourself, and we all get in our bubbles, we do, to understanding how your actions lead others to define themselves. And leaders that are taking this class right now, please don't take this lightly because it's absolutely true. Oftentimes, especially newer employees, form their work identities in no small part based on you, who you are to them, what you represent to them, what you model to them, how you interact with them. Even veteran dispatchers who don't have titles, I'm talking to you too, because veteran dispatchers, you have a tremendous impact in your centers. You may feel powerless at times. I get it. But I'll never forget as a new employee when a veteran dispatcher would come up to me and pat me on the back or buy me a soda or tell me good job. My God, it made my entire year because I looked up to that veteran dispatcher so much. So understand that. Understand in this interdependent environment what your actions mean, what your emotions mean, what your nonverbals mean to other people. Get introspective. Stay introspective. What is it about what I do that helps define what they do. Subordinates, try to avoid that combat stance. I know it's hard, and I know that you're already kicking your own ass about your mistakes, but try. Try to be as open to this process as you can be, as hard as it is. Strive to discuss, not to disrupt. Be coachable. I'm a coach's kid, so I grew up with the whole idea of being coachable. That doesn't mean it was easy. Sometimes my dad would get after me in ways that just made me madder. But you know what? Hindsight is always the true eyesight, isn't it? Don't you ever look back at things, the way you handled something, and know how it should have gone much clearer later? Like, have you ever had a tough conversation with somebody and then 10 minutes later, my God, here's what I should have said. I'd have said this. Then you go through your mind, all these things you could have said to really hammer it. And that's just the way it tends to be in hindsight. Try to make that the way it is now. Try to see things for the way they are. Try to be coachable, because later on, if you're not, you will regret it. Own it. Use it when it comes to mistakes. And again, just like when I tell dispatchers to work on their listening, and I know what I'm asking, I also know that when I ask dispatchers to lean into their mistakes and learn from them, and I'm asking a lot, because it's hard. We want to run away from our mistakes because they're so against everything that we think we are, everything that we're trying to be, everything that we stand for in the job that we do, and everything that the job asks us to do and not to do. But you guys know damn well, if you're being honest, you can do something right 1,000 times. I hope you do. But it's the one time you screw something up that you stand to learn the most. I don't learn a whole lot from all the stuff I did right. I liked it. I'm glad I did most of it right. That's what we aspire to. I'm not suggesting in this class that you go make a bunch of mistakes in order to learn a bunch of great lessons. But what I am suggesting to you is that as a human being, you're going to make the mistakes. Sometimes. Yes, sometimes it's going to happen. Lean into them, learn from them, be better because of them. Because the tough moments are where growth happens, if you're willing to allow it to happen. Own it. Use it. Find a way to get past being locked into your reactions. Why is the person reacting the way they are? Could you have a role in someone else's reaction? Maybe every single time you go talk to a group of people, there's some kind of conflict, and all you think to yourself is, man, I don't know what's wrong with people. Maybe the change that is necessary starts with you. Maybe the common denominator in this continual conflict that you experience is because of your presence in the scenario. Not saying that it is, but I am suggesting in this common denominator theory that oftentimes the person responsible is the last person to see or understand it. So be aware of that. And please remember, maybe most importantly of all, this isn't personal. This is a job, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a damned important one, and it's one that I know you're passionate about. You wouldn't be at this conference if you weren't. It's one that I know you deeply care about, that you take tremendous pride in, and I celebrate all of that. I celebrate all of you, but it's still not personal. It's still a job. You're still not going to remember this thing that upset you so much in 5 years. You know, one of the great things about hindsight, looking back on a career that I retired from after 28 years, and there were so many things over the course of years as a subordinate, as a supervisor, that kept me up at night, that I couldn't get out of my head, that I was like, oh, what am I going to do, that were ulcer inducing. I don't even remember. I have no memory of any of it. I don't know what I was upset about. I don't know. I mean, I remember the church burning down, but I don't remember the little things that I took so to heart over the years. But what I am reminded of with crystal clarity hindsight is none of that was personal. No matter how personal it felt at the time, it wasn't. It's not. So please don't forget that. Last thoughts before I let you do your thing. Each of our perceptions of reality is reality. Respect that. Try not to fight it. It's not really debatable. Again, it's going on Facebook. It's arguing politics. No point in that. Nobody wins. And all of us, supervisors, subordinates, trainers, trainees, we all have expectations that need to be met. We're all propping ourselves up in a certain way based on our beliefs about who we are, based on our work identity, that we ask you to respect, even if you're in a position of authority, even if we've done something really heinous. Still, we need that. We all need that from each other in order for these conversations, difficult or otherwise, to work the way we need them to. And we need them to. Step outside yourself to see yourself. Stay reflective. That's the way. Guys, gals, thank you so much for being here, for taking part in this class with me today. Once again, Ricardo, thanks for having me here at this amazing conference. I'm Chris Inman from the Healthy Dispatcher. Please reach out to us at the Healthy Dispatcher. Follow us on our socials if you don't. We're creating all kinds of great content by dispatchers for dispatchers. And we'd love to speak to you more about what it is that we're doing. Join us at thehealthydispatcher.com or any of the socials. And by the way, you date yourself as an old person no quicker than when you refer to social media as the socials. If you'll follow us on the Facebook and follow us on the Twitter, that's how you know. So please do follow us. We'd love to have you be a part of what it is that we're doing. Thank you all so very much for being here and being attentive and taking part. And please take this information forward, tuck it under your arm, use it, be better from it. Thank you all so much. Ricardo, thanks.
All right, man. Thank you very much. And you're right about like the interwebs, interwebs, socials, the face
Twitter,
space.
the
Yeah.
Facebook.
Oh man, I love it. Thank you, man, very much. A bunch of good information and just everyone in the comments saying as well. I want to mention really quick, Amy over here says, Chris, great session and information. Watch this with my 6 new dispatchers, valuable information. Boom. That is what it is all about. Ryan says the book of face. Oh,
Join us on the
those
Book of Face.
yeah, those are all good ones. Everyone, make sure to check out everything that the Healthy Dispatcher is doing with Adam and Chris and the entire crew. Hit up that QR code. What I love the most is that people will be able to come back and watch this as many times as they want, so they can get information off of that as well and follow them on the socials.
On the socials.
So there you go. Thank you again very much for everything that you do, what you did in the center, what you're doing outside of the center, and continuing for the profession, man. I appreciate that very much. And the next time I see you, I'll probably have my championship belt again, and we'll have to throw down.
I always have to get a picture with that belt. You know, Ricardo and I, major wrestling guys. I think that's how we click more than any other way. So if you ever
Oh
see
yeah,
the two of us at a conference and one of us has the other in a headlock, it's all good. It's all good.
yeah, it's all right. We know what we're doing. It's
Thank you
thank
all.
you again. And we will be going to the next session that's going to be with Steve Turchin, and it's going to be Leadership Reimagined Followership. So I'll bring all of you over there here momentarily, and we'll be right there in a moment.